And as your breath returns to its natural rhythm, simply notice what that is in this moment. Allowing your breath to breathe you, and noticing how it feels to rest in darkened stillness. Perhaps noticing that just by closing our eyes or softening our gaze, some of our other senses and centers of perception open and expand. Perhaps noticing the relief of being invited to turn one's attention within. And beginning our practice this evening by just noticing, through what lens are you perceiving this evening? How are you arriving? How and where are you in this moment? And I invite us all to take a moment to listen deeply, noticing the pace and quality of the mind. Noticing what feelings might be here this evening. Noticing the sensations in your body and welcoming life as it is, welcoming yourself as you are to this field, to this space of shared presence. And as we settle in at the start of our meditation, I simply would like for us to acknowledge in the quietude what some of our kin are experiencing in the face of the hurricanes right now, this week, just sending loving kindness at the start of our meditation to all those who have suffered through the hurricane, who have lost homes, who have been displaced. And now, where you are, supported by body, breath, and darkened stillness, I invite you to let go of what has been today. To let go of the past. To let go of any cares or concerns about this evening. To let go of the future. I invite us all to rest here. Letting go of everything that is not original to this moment. Simply being with what is. Invite yourself to soften effort and rest here. Anchored in body and breath, allowing awareness to expand organically with each breath you take. Being aware of all of that's moving through the inner landscape, resting in awareness of the landscape surrounding you. Be curious about where the physical body ends and the spaciousness surrounding you begins. Nothing to do or make happen. Nothing to solve or fix or change. Nothing to strive for, nowhere to get to. Letting all of that effort soften as you rest in being. You might be aware of the ever-changing nature of thoughts, feelings, sensations. And you can be aware of that which is unchanging. Spacious awareness itself. Just resting in 360 degrees awareness, within and out. Being with what is exactly as it is. And I'd like to invite you now into a short meditation on darkness. So just as you are, resting, anchored in body and breath. I invite you to imagine now, to visualize that you are sitting beside a window, and that this is a window open not to the daylight, but to the vast, luminous darkness. Picture the velvety darkness of the night sky. Darkness visible and symbolic, the field from which everything arises and to which everything will return. The mystery, the unknown, the unformed, the invisible. The field of infinite possibility. Just notice now how it feels within your being and body to sit beside this window into darkness. You might be present to some inspiration or excitement. You might be present to a tinge of fear. So just being compassionate towards whatever experience you're having. Recognizing the role that the unknown, the mystery, plays in our lives as human beings. I invite us to begin to offer, to make an offering of reverence, of respect towards the darkness, towards the unknown, towards the mystery. So if you'd like to, you can rest a hand on your heart if that feels authentic. And from within your own heart, allow yourself to express your reverence towards the unknown, the field of all possibility. Just noticing how it feels to do so. And I invite you to, if you would like, ask to receive compassion from the mystery, from the darkness, towards yourself. Just letting yourself gently shift and be the receiver now. Noticing any way that you might feel yourself receiving loving kindness, compassion, or simply a connection with, a oneness with the unknown. Now I'd like you to gently shift. And again, perhaps with hand on heart, to simply offer compassion towards yourself. This being who is yours to care for, to honor, to befriend. And as you continue to receive, I'd like to share a quote from my book, Luminous Darkness, and simply invite you to take this in. The first step to endarkenment is to become curious about darkness beyond your familiar associations. Be open to what you don't know that you don't know about darkness and light, about yourself, about the mystery itself. we can learn to meet the unknown and the experience of not knowing with an open and humble heart, much more full of wonder and willingness than fear. And let's take in together now a couple more deep, conscious, full body breaths. Okay, friends. Anyone who'd like to share before we continue a word or phrase in the chat box for something you received or experienced in that meditation? Many of us are used to sending reverence and loving kindness towards that which we can see, that which is known, but curious about how it felt to do so towards the mystery itself, towards the darkness. Yeah. And while some of you might be responding to that invitation, I'd love to know if anyone here this evening is new to New York Insight, if it's a first time for any of you, to perhaps either raise your hand or just let us know in the chat box. And so I'm seeing reverence for the darkness and its richness. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Anyone else? So I'm going to move into sharing a Dharma teaching, and then I'm going to invite us into a little bit of inquiry together and open up the space for questions and reflections, okay? And we'll be ending this evening at about 7:30 p.m. and there might be some time at the end for New York Insight to share some announcements. So I want to go back to the chat box for a moment. Darkness, the unknown, saying yes to what is and foregoing resistance. Thank you. Beautiful. Some fear came up. Being with the fear softened it. Thank you, Steph. Experienced loving curiosity. Beautiful. Okay. I'll take a moment just to see if anyone else wants to bring your voice in. So consider that most of us have been taught to fear the dark, to fear the unknown, the unwanted, the unfamiliar. When the terrain we're standing on feels unstable or wobbly, when we're navigating change or just meeting something new sometimes. Our conditioned tendency as human beings is to try to get back to seemingly solid ground, the familiar, the light, that which we can label and rationally understand. So sometimes tonight you'll hear me point to the domain of light as the lamp of knowledge. And you'll hear me point to this collective human tendency to hold light as superior to dark, something we've done for a long time throughout history, and thus a way that we've justified trying to focus on the rational mind, on our mind of discrimination, labeling, hierarchical perception as a way of navigating life, instead of remembering deeper forms of knowing. Okay? So while we have this fear of the unknown, no matter who we are as human beings, we live with uncertainty. Together, we're facing a time of unprecedented change and global uncertainty. And there's a profound teacher in this. In spiritual practice, anyone who's on the path is invited to, required is a better word, to leave the familiar shore and to not yet know what or where the next shore is where one will land. And practice becomes about navigating that in-between space, meeting with reverence, the unknown, the field of all possibility, that which is unformed and cannot be seen or labeled or understood, even though we try to. And even in ordinary everyday life, and I'd invite people to look within and see what your own experience is of this, we are continually given opportunities to meet the unknown. Every single moment of our life is fresh, is unformed, is new. And yet if we're coming from habitual perception, we both miss the opportunity to awaken to the freshness of every moment, the field of possibility, beginner's mind as our means for navigating life. We also tend to come up with ways, and you can look within and see how this might be true for you. We find ways to fill space, to fill empty space, to fill by putting belief and label and categorizing life when we cannot see it clearly or understand. And so I am deeply inspired, inspired enough to write a whole book about the topic, by the teacher of darkness and the long-held bias in human consciousness towards light, which I think keeps us from recognizing a profound spiritual teacher beckoning in every moment, beckoning at this moment in human history when we are together facing more uncertainty than any of our ancestors ever faced. And so I just want to pause for a moment and ask our circle here, how many of you are present to some way, just personally, in which you are navigating the unknown or change right now in life? Perhaps a show of hands or nods, just a presence to make your own personal connection. Yeah. And how many of you are feeling in everyday life the emotional, psychic, spiritual experience of the collective unknown that we're facing? And so one of the gifts for me in the beginning of the pandemic was that I took the first year to complete this book that had been calling me for some time. This book that had been being birthed through me slowly for a number of years, about the luminous darkness, recognizing that in my life, I'm well aware of conditioning I received as a young person, conditioning I received growing up in the brightly lit and artificially lit city of Los Angeles, where I notice that sometimes there's a capacity towards sun shining, meaning an attempt to, through spiritual bypassing, sort of push away that which we find uncomfortable, push away that which we find complex or multidimensional, push away that which is painful and try to keep it light. And I find that there's a connection between what I'm witnessing as a lover of this earth, the overlighting of our planet, and the overlighting of human consciousness. In a sense, a way that this bias towards light has caused a fracture in our wholeness. By holding a bias towards light, trying to push away the unknown and hang on tightly to labeling, categorizing, perceiving through hierarchical perception, we lose the invitation to actually be with darkness and the unknown as a great spiritual teacher. How many of you here have experienced in your life the great teacher of darkness in some way, even if it's as simple as through your physical meditation practice, that first moment of recognizing that, as scared or resistant as a part of you might have been, the invitation is actually to surrender to fertile emptiness, to surrender to darkness, rather than to try to get somewhere, rather than to try to attain enlightenment as an end and a goal. So when I speak of luminous darkness, this is on many levels akin to the fertile emptiness. And some of us have had the experience of witnessing ourselves before tasting the fertile emptiness, considering emptiness the absence of something, and therefore wanting to fill space, to push it away, wanting to hang on to mental effort or the thinking mind in order to avoid it. Likewise, many of us have been taught to think of darkness as the absence of light. It actually says so in the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, the absence of light. And yet there are spiritual traditions throughout the globe, throughout history, who have recognized darkness as so much more, as an instigator for spiritual growth. Darkness not as the absence of light, but the presence of all possibility. Darkness as the space from which we all came and to which we will all return. Darkness as the yin, slow, restorative aspect of nature and consciousness. And again, in the dominant paradigm today, there tends to be much more of a bias towards light and speed and fast and rational mind. Everyone with me? And so in this book, I'm inviting people to remember and reconnect with the potent teachings of darkness, because as human beings, we are asked and required to meet the unknown in every day of our life. This past week, in the mirror of book release and watching this project that has been for so long in the womb and in a protected field, watching it birth out into the world and watching this with great joy. It's deeply gratifying and has been incredible to receive so much appreciation from those who have read it. But I witnessed my own fear of the unknown arising, and I watched the mind come up to try to fill the space through story, through what could happen or what should happen, or through doing. Okay, so I want to ask all of us to just reflect on some of the ways that while we might be well aware of the core of our being, deeply loving the unknown as an expression of deeply loving life, deeply loving all of it, when fear or resistance arises, the conditioned response is to fill, is to avoid, is to perhaps busy ourselves, is to perhaps label. I watched myself recently walking through a forest, and while I am a lover of the wilderness and enjoy spending time deep listening to trees, I noticed the mind wanting to label a particular flower and categorize it as a way of knowing it, rather than knowing by being with this unknown presence. Are people with me? So we get to look subtly at the ways we miss at times an opportunity to awaken through a deeper form of knowing. And darkness invites us into this form. One of the metaphors I use in the book is walking through a thicketed, dark forest, which we have many of where I live in the mountains of the Carolinas, and walking without a brightly lit path lighting the way, walking without signs pointing the direction, acknowledging that in the environment of dark, lush forest, we're given full permission to drop into our sensing, feeling body beyond the mind of labeling and discrimination. We're invited to drop into a deeper form of listening, sensing, an awareness that has to do with recognizing our earth body as a profound center of relational intelligence, which we forget far too often when fixated on the rational mind. And in this day and age, when we all have choices regularly to either label as a way of escaping the fertility of the spacious presence of not knowing, the invitation instead to undarken, to go within into our sensing, feeling, being bodies, into the relational forms of knowing that include intuition and inner vision, into a field of relational intelligence that, from my perspective, as we navigate all that we are as a species right now, is one of our most important allies. Yeah. I want to invite each of you for a moment to just think about any ways that you are aware of the tendency towards filling rather than emptying. Does everyone know what I mean by that? The tendency towards mental efforting, doing, rather than being. Everything about meditation is a teaching on emptying. Nothing to do to attain enlightenment. Everything about emptying to remember the already awakened state. The already awakened state, the spacious background of darkness and all possibility and interconnection that is with us in every moment. Again, the field from which everything arises and returns. It's possible to live in the peaceful, regenerative balance of light and dark, where we recognize both the emergence and dissolving and the field from which all emerges. Okay? So just pause for a moment. And I thought I would share some principles that I write about in this book for navigating the unknown, and specifically change, letting ourselves be led by the darkness rather than fear it. Okay? And you can simply reflect as you listen on your own life, the context of whatever you're going through, and see how these might apply or touch you, right? Some of these will be quite familiar to you and alive and rooted in your own practice. We have to let go of story and rest in not knowing. Just acknowledging the surface narrative of fear, doubt, or what if, and how it maintains our insistence on limiting beliefs. Practice invites us to let go of our devotion to projecting authority externally, authority as the conditioned mind, authority as someone out there, and instead reclaim the authority of the heart of our being. This is really the invitation of practice, okay? We must declare our heart's intention without being attached to outcome. So I'm aware, even in the writing of my book, I let go completely of outcome, and I declared my heart's intention for the process I chose to bring to the book, one of presence and love and courage and compassion, and from there trusting the product, the outcome, the life's directive. Yeah, we have to remember that life is an emergent process, and this might seem obvious, but so many of us are conditioned to focus on reaching a destination or conclusion as quickly as possible. Sometimes when we're listening to another human, listening to a loved one, instead of resting in the space of not knowing together, which would be the most compassionate thing for that person who's needing to be energetically held, we go right into trying to solve, trying to fix, trying to offer advice, trying to get somewhere. Okay. While ego seeks immediate gratification and visible external evidence that we are okay or going in the right direction, there is another way, and this is about trusting the invisible confirmation that we access through intuition, through insight, through inner guidance. This requires paying attention to subtle body awareness as our moment-by-moment guide. One of my deep gratitudes from Zen practice is the invitation as a young person to begin to let breath and body be my anchor no matter what I was doing, to let meditation begin to infuse all of life simply through breath and body. And when I say body, earth body, the body that grounds me here and now in this moment, my connection to gravity, and in the spaciousness of interconnected awareness. Okay. Just a few more I'll name. Direct revelation or inner vision requires conscious boundaries. And again, this is about as we're navigating the unknown, or as we're opening to the unknown, having conscious boundaries with the conditioned mind, with the sometimes loud, sometimes repetitive, sometimes insistent messages of the conditioned mind. And many of you know through your own meditation practice, the gift and the discipline required to be able, through fierce compassion, to say no to stories in our conditioned mind that are not of service, that are simply not true. Okay, we must stay in touch with wonder, curiosity, and fascination. Just out of curiosity, even when I invited you to sit beside the window to darkness, how many of you did feel in touch with a sense of wonder, of fascination? So recognizing the wakefulness of beginner's mind, of meeting everything in life with this wonder, this fascination as a choice we have instead of the labeling. Just yesterday, I noticed in the relational field in my home, my husband was in a grouchy mood. And I noticed part of me wanting to label that and then wanting to take it personally, wanting to do something about it. And very quickly, because of my practice, I could drop it and let it be, and let us both be in the spaciousness between us, in the field that could hold whatever emotion was moving through him and whatever was moving through me, without any of it being given the label better or worse, higher or lower. This is a way of meeting life as it is with love. People resonate with that example? And just a few more. Cultivating partnership with nature. This dissolves the illusion of separation and isolation. And this is an important aspect of the book that I've written because I feel that one of the signposts of the dominant paradigm is a degree of anthropocentrism that even sometimes in our practice gets woven in the world of bright lights, of speed, of screens, of external demands and busyness. It can sometimes seem like the human realm is the focus or the only realm. When we rest more and more often in darkness, when we let ourselves receive the teacher of darkness, which again opens up our relational center of knowing more fully, we awaken equally to our connection with every form of life, with all forms of life, with all consciousness. We awaken from small to larger self. Okay? I want to pause and ask if Leah and perhaps Amit would begin to set out breakout rooms just for a short 10-minute share of putting people in pairs. Let me just see how our numbers are. And then maybe Leah, if it would serve numbers for either you or Amit to participate or not, you could set that up. And for anyone who's newer to relational mindfulness, I find it so useful when we are sitting down to meditate together, to receive teaching, to also get to connect one-on-one in the field of deep listening and simply reflect, inquire into our own experience as related to this evening's topic, okay? As much as I'm here to offer some wisdom tonight, I'm here to learn from all of you, and we're here to rest in shared presence and learn from one another's experience. So your questions will be a couple of choices. One is simply to acknowledge while your partner just listens a way that you are experiencing or navigating change and the unknown, to acknowledge how that has been for you and what you perhaps have seen in the mirror of this unknown. Sometimes we get to see ways that we fill space again, or try to busy or use rational understanding. Sometimes we see the invitation to soften even more into receptivity and deep listening and trust. So I'd like for you to just take 5 minutes each to look at that. Any questions before we do so? Again, one person will share while the other just listens. And if anyone chooses to not enter a breakout room, you would want to let us know that now. Afterwards, we'll come back together for reflections and questions. But I feel that this opportunity to get a little more personal with how we're meeting the unknown and what we see in the mirror of this is very useful. So Leah, tell me how we are on times.
I
Are you
think
ready?
yeah, I think it's set up. We'll see if it
Okay.
works. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Beautiful. So it's 6:54 Eastern time. Let's come back at 4 after and just to share that time evenly, if you will, and just to listen. And there might be some tenderness in the space to allow whatever's here to be here. All right. See you soon. Welcome back. Okay. As people return, if anyone wants to share a word or phrase in the chat box for something you received or experienced, you're welcome to. So again, if any of you want to share a word or phrase in the chat box for something you received in that, either in the inquiry itself or just the practice of listening and being listened to. Resonance, warmth, connection and resonance. Beautiful. I want to share some poetic words that Amit posted earlier. Endarkenment, send me to the moist earth, mycelium full aliveness. Beautiful. So let's open it up to questions and reflections. And I love hearing from you and engaging with you. This is my favorite way to teach. And just before we do, I want to underline a point that I didn't speak to so much, but beyond meeting the unknown through change, through uncertainty, through global uncertainty, we are all, as human beings, regularly navigating the unknown within ourselves, the unknown in the relational field as we engage with one another. This week I got to watch on PBS a program I highly recommend about the Holocaust and the response in the US at the time. And I found it a profound teaching about xenophobia. And one of my intentions in writing this book about remembering to meet the unknown with full presence, with beginner's mind, meeting the darkness with absolute reverence, is to acknowledge the degree to which the duality between dark and light has caused tremendous xenophobia in our world and tremendous suffering within human beings by othering parts of our own psyche. People know what I'm pointing to? So I simply want to presence that in our field, though it's not the emphasis of tonight's teaching. It needs to be said in any teaching about darkness. So let's open it up. I would love to know what's feeling alive for you, what you're feeling curious about, what you'd like to ask more about, what would help you in your practice go deeper. So anyone who has a question, you can raise a hand, either digitally or like this, because we can all see one another. And I see, is it Andrea? I can't hear you just yet. Let's take a moment to make sure you're unmuted.
There
There
we
you
go.
are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Wonderful to be here and to look at this with all of you. And thank you for your time and your energy spent on putting this forward. My daughter's name is Eden. So yeah, equanimity has been on my radar quite a bit lately in my practice. And kind of this notion of, right, be like a mountain, no matter how the winds are blowing, the lions are prowling, be steadfast like a mountain. And kind of whether you see some kind of interaction between holding uncertainty and allowing spaciousness within that, and sort of working with our own responses around whether or not we can be with that. And the process of kind of equanimity and what kind of our associations and what our experiences of that are as we kind of face both individual and collective unknown times and turbulent times.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. The first thing arising for me is when you say, be like a mountain. For me, I would gently tweak it. Remember the part of us who is already a mountain. Remember the presence of mountain-like equanimity, which already exists within. This means remember that awareness is the mountain. And so much of what we're doing in our meditation practice, and when I say meditation practice, I mean our formal practice and our informal practice of every day of life as our laboratory, is that we are stabilizing our recognition of who we are as awareness itself. That's why learning to surrender more to darkness and recognize that we are held here, that darkness is this fertile field that holds us, is important. So if we think I need to be like a mountain, then we might think there's something I need to do, or sometimes it's a way of thinking compassion is outside of me. I want to try to cultivate compassion. It's so much simpler. It's so much simpler and it's counterintuitive. We are meditating to remember the compassion that is innate, to remember the awareness that is already stable, and to stabilize our recognition of who we really are as that. Is that helpful so far? And then I'll speak to the next piece.
That's lovely. Yes, thank you. Because what sort of popped up for me was the Buddha saying, "Oh, you of noble birth, remember who you truly are." And
Yeah.
this sense of recognition and remembering and recovery, and coming back to what's already known. So thank you for
Yes.
deepening it in that way.
And just to add a bit, from that place, from the spaciousness of awareness or stillness, if we're resting there, there is all the room in the world for multidimensionality, for complexity, for different perspectives, for the perspective we're holding, perspectives others are holding, for the part of us who has fear next to the part who is stabilized, so who's actually resting in groundlessness. There's room for all of it. But if I'm not letting myself be held by that stillness, then I'm going to be caught up in one of those parts. If I'm resting in the stillness, then I can be with the multidimensionality of all of it. And then if the fearful one is here in the face of change, I'm able to recognize this and let the compassion come through that is the medicine, the alchemical medicine for that fear. You with me?
I am. Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's
Yeah.
good teaching.
And just to remind people, there's so much different language we could use when we're talking about stillness or spaciousness. We could also say we consciousness, shared presence. It's a place of interconnection, the place where, again, there's all the room in the world for multidimensionality, this and that, as opposed to this and that. Fear alongside courage. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So kind of non-dual and non-conceptual too, felt
You got
sense,
it.
because in the darkness we feel our way through, right?
Thank
Yeah.
you. In the
Thank you so
darkness, we
much.
feel our way through. Yes. Tina, would you like to unmute?
Yes, I was trying to. Hello, Eden.
Hi.
I love the title of your book.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess I wondered if you could speak a little to a way that I, and probably many people traditionally think of the darkness. Is it's sort of new to me to think about that term with being what's unknown or the mystery, but it's very natural to feel into that. But of course, I think about it also as like the negative parts of ourself, our negative emotions, our negative experiences, negative, in quotes, that are uncomfortable, that aren't pretty, that I think I've been. How do you incorporate that, if you do,
Yes.
into this concept of in darkening and what it can yield? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. First, I'll share, going back to the book, that in the second chapter, which is called Befriending the Night, I share about my personal journey of, at the age of 26, shaving my head, giving away my belongings, becoming a Zen Buddhist monk for the next 7.5 years. And that journey of befriending the night within and out, externally, because we were living in the Sierra wilderness with the darkest night skies I have ever seen. And we're a solar community. So when the sun went down, there was just the darkness of night. You're either going to befriend it and recognize the medicine of darkness, or exist in fear. And simultaneously within myself, for the first time, facing all those different parts of me, those emotions that I had judged and pushed away, the grief that had been with me since I lost my father at age 11, that I had shoved deep down into my heart space and not allowed to heal. The pain I felt about the world I was living in. I was a student and activist for the environment and social justice, the pain of all of that. And all of it emerged, and all of it emerged to be with. There's a whole chapter on being with the angriest part of me I had ever known. I called her Electra because she was electric with anger, and I got to meet her at the monastery. I hadn't even been aware of her before. And the beauty, in my experience of practice, is that this is not a practice of needing to push away the dark to get to the light, or needing to get past the quote unquote negative. And I was so glad you used quotes, to stay positive or get to the positive. This is a practice of all inclusivity, of resting in the presence, the shared presence, the compassionate awareness itself that welcomes all that is and that sees clearly. The parts of me that I had labeled negative or trouble ended up being sacred messengers. They ended up being thresholds for me to step into a deeper power and wholeness than I had. My anger became a great spiritual teacher. I had been numbed out before I embraced the angry one inside, which I recognize as an ancestral force, the anger from generation upon generation of witnessing greed, hate, and delusion in our world. Are people following? So as a Dharma teacher, I don't believe in positive, negative. I don't. And I don't believe that that psychology, it's very popular in our world, positive versus negative, is helpful or healthy. And what I invite instead is for people to become more aware, compassionately aware, because it can be easy to judge ourselves through awareness at first, of the habit of hierarchical perception, and to acknowledge that from original consciousness. Eihei Dogen, the 12th century founder of Zen, points to practice as a return to source, return to original consciousness. This consciousness does not judge. It does not see higher, lower, good, bad. It's a seeing clearly from the heart. And for me, as a human being, I embrace and acknowledge the full spectrum of light and dark as part of the human experience. And when we can embrace both sides, we can be fully alive. If not, there's going to be some degree of numbing out, or some degree of trying to cut off, again, a part that might be our greatest sacred messenger towards healing. So fierce compassion is part of my answer to your question. Alongside gentle compassion, the compassion of doing nothing but holding space, doing nothing but being with, through being willing to turn towards and be with what we have labeled dark, we get to access the already existing fierce compassion inside for ourselves and for our collective. And we need this in our world. We're going to need it as we navigate ever deepening challenge in the face of climate crisis. We're going to need it as we work through this intense division that's formed in the relational field. You following? Yeah. And just to remind people, this dissolving of the duality of positive, negative begins on the meditation cushion. We practice being with what is. And I describe it as sometimes at first, it's like the metaphor of being a small clay vessel. We're comfortable with certain emotions and sensations, but not most. So we're pretty small. And then we begin to expand. Okay, I can be with this too, until we begin to become as large as all of life. Because while the physical body has dimensions, a size, I'm a very small, petite person, for instance, awareness has no dimensions, and it does not exist in linear time. It exists in deep time, so it's boundless. But we're going to remain afraid and resistant towards that boundlessness if we're continuing to label things dark and then use that to justify pushing them away. Okay? Yeah. Thank you for that question. Appreciate it.
Abby had a question that I'm going to read aloud.
Great. Thank you, Leah.
Yeah. Can you speak to the means of deepening one's intuition, means to tapping into deeper sense of intuition or feelings when faced with the unknown?
Yes, thank you. So, how do we tap into deeper intuition? And again, similar to what I shared earlier about remembering the already awakened state, not something we have to do or try to get to. It's very similar with intuition. My personal experience and as a practitioner and as a woman was that I've always had a strong intuition. I've always been deeply sensitive. And yet, because of the presence of the residue of patriarchy and patriarchal perception and the hierarchical perception that's part of the dominant paradigm, that light and rational mind are better than dark, and the domain of intuition, relational forms of knowing, empathy, imagination, I always kind of judged those parts of me. As a young person, I kind of judged that as a little bit less than. I certainly took on the conditioned belief that like strength was more the, again, the patriarchal model, force as strength rather than receptivity as strength. Are people following me? And meditation turned that completely upside down. Now, the beauty is we're here to model the innate strength of both yin and yang, light and dark, and that's where our wholeness and our shared power is. But for me, it was a journey of acknowledging that the more I learned to rest in presence, the more I learned to stop filling space, whether this was filling through mental effort or filling through labeling or going into the future or the past, and empty instead, resting in darkness. The more I became aware that my body was an already existing potent field for relational intelligence, which I had turned away from, which I had not recognized its power. And so my feeling is that today, with all that we're navigating and the fact that we need inner vision, the fact that we need visionary activism, the fact that we need much more than reliance on our rational mind as we navigate the intensity we're all facing, is that we have access to this profound instrument of relational intelligence. Meditation helps us to remember this. Meditation helps us to access this. But we have to be willing to get out of the way and to not discount our intuition, for instance, or to not discount the subtle body awareness that through deep listening, we begin to reignite. Okay. So there's a lot that I could say on this. I teach often relational intelligence. I have a 6-month training called the Heart of Listening that's both for experienced practitioners and community leaders, facilitators, and we do a lot that's about strengthening one's intuition, both in life and leadership. This is useful. But deep listening, as opposed to shallow listening, is the initial and foundational teaching. So think of shallow listening as when we're just listening to the stories in our head, to our minds, believing that we are our thoughts, believing every word. If we're committed to questioning external authority and returning to the authority of the heart, we have to drop deeper into an embodied listening, even when we're listening to other people, beyond the words, beyond what we're hearing in an auditory way, to energy, emotion, all of it. Yeah. Awareness is a listener. Awareness is resting and listening. So thank you. We are at 25 after, so I'm wondering we might have time for one more short question, and then we'll begin to bring our time to a close, or short reflection. And I just want to say how much I've appreciated time to gather with all of you this evening, and the invitation to drop in deeply together, even in just an hour and a half. So let's see if there's perhaps one more before we move on. So my sense is that we're coming to completion. Yeah. And I'll just share that if more bubbles up and emerges for you after this session, well, for one thing, I encourage people to pick up a copy of Luminous Darkness, an engaged Buddhist approach to embracing the unknown. It was a really beautiful and profound process to write this book, and I'm grateful to be able to share it now. And if you visit my website, which is deborahedentall.com, you'll find a number of other offerings on this topic, from short sessions like this to longer retreats. And I will be offering next year just a monthly gathering, just meeting once a month to dive into the teachings of endarkenment from this book. And so there's more support if you'd like to reach out. And you'll also find on my website, I have a weekly sitting group and a number of different trainings and teachings. So I'll say to be continued. And I want to deeply thank New York Insight and just say how much I appreciate in this time getting to come together on Zoom and drop into shared presence. The fact that we can do this through the screen and the quality of presence is not disrupted, because this field of awareness, again, goes beyond the dimensions of this physical body. It goes beyond linear time. And we can feel that connectedness wherever we are in this group, in many different geographical locations right now, right? Before I dedicate the merit, I simply want to remind people that you are welcome and invited to make an offering of dana in the spirit of generosity to New York Insight for these teachings, and to share that for me, one of the things that is most valuable to me about having a practice is the dissolving of the separate self, dissolving of the I versus you, and the invitation to live, and it's my practice to live each day in the we consciousness. And this invites me into a living inquiry into reciprocity. What does it mean, separate from the I versus you, to be living in reciprocity and to recognize the reciprocity I'm living in my community and with the land that I live on, and also including that in the economy of our sanghas. So when we offer dana, we're supporting the organization to continue to share the teachings. We're supporting the teacher to continue to let their well be filled, to offer the spiritual teachings that are coming through. We're supporting one another to keep having this space as a shared space. So thank you for considering that. And I see, was there a hand? Yes. Is that, I can't hear you quite yet. Let's take a minute.
Yes, hi.
Yeah,
I just
there you are.
Your website one more time, please. I missed it.
Sure. It's deborahedentall.com. If I were to do it again, I would have come up with something shorter, but instead, my full name. Yeah, and you can also find me on social media. I tend to be a Luddite and never really engaged on social media until Shambhala said some months ago, why don't you take it on as a creative experiment? It would so help spread the word about the book. And so I knew I couldn't take it on from the resistance I had towards it, but I could take it on through opening my heart and bringing complete beginner's mind. Like, I don't want to spend any more time on a screen than anyone else does or encourage people to. And yet, how can it be something that, without overusing it, we have to have a really mindful relationship with the screen and with social media, all of us. But in that field, how can it be something that actually supports this reciprocity that nature models and that I was just speaking to? Yeah. Okay. So Leah and Amit, shall I dedicate the merit? And then if there are any announcements you want to make, you can. Okay, all right. So let's pause and perhaps put our palms together, close our eyes again, just resting in darkened stillness and taking in a deep breath together. And let's acknowledge our gratitude for this space, for our practice, for the gift each of us has received in being able to be here and be here together. And let's acknowledge again, as I did at the beginning, all those who are suffering from the hurricane, and just begin by sending our loving kindness and our well wishes and our compassion in that direction. And let's bring ourselves back for a moment to the luminous darkness, acknowledging that spiritual traditions around the globe have revered the darkness of the night skies, have recognized the spiritual teacher of darkness, have valued and cherished the natural processes which take place only in the dark, from seed in soil to embryo resting in the darkness of the womb, caterpillar in its cocoon. We could go on. So let's all just in our hearts appreciate the darkness and dedicate the merit of our time together to all beings across time and space, visible and invisible, seen and unseen, the realm of the ancestors and the realm of the future. And lastly, giving the beauty of our gathering back to the earth, just imagining right where you are, the ground beneath you, the soil beneath you, the roots and rocks and stones, giving it all back to the earth, recognizing the potency and power of actively giving our love to this earth each day. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. And New York Insight, always thank you so much for having me and for how you hold the space. Are there any announcements?
I'd just like to thank you, Eden, on behalf of New York Insight, and thank everyone who brought themselves to this evening that we could be together.
Thank you, Leah. All right. Take good care, friends. I hope to see you again. Bye-bye for now.